In a remote village called Umuocha, nestled between thick forests and tall mountains, a strange tradition had been passed down through generations. The villagers believed that a man who reached the age of 35 without marrying is cursed with the spirit of men-loving men. It was said that such a man must be banished, for it was believed that he was a man who had abandoned his duties and had secret desires that were considered unnatural. In this village, there lived a young man named Equi. He was strong, handsome, and wise, but there was one thing that had always troubled him: he had never married. And at the age of 35, the village elders decided it was time for him to face the harsh punishment laid out in their customs. But what no one knew, not even the elders, was that Equi was not a man without love. In fact, there was a woman he had loved dearly since childhood, Amoka. They had spent their days running through the forest, swimming in the river, and dreaming of a life together. But one fateful day, Amoka abandoned him for a wealthy suitor in a nearby village. She married him, and Equi was left heartbroken. Since then, he had not found the love he once shared with her, and despite his longing, no man seemed to match her beauty or spirit. So, when the elders called for his banishment, Equi knew his heart had been broken twice, once by Amoka, and now by his own people. The day of Equi's banishment was a sober one. The villagers gathered in the village square, their faces filled with judgment. Equi stood before the village elders, his head bowed but his heart filled with anger and confusion. "You are 35 and unmarried," the chief elder said, his voice stern. "We can no longer allow you to stay among us. You are a threat to our village. You must leave." Equi tried to speak, but the words choked in his throat. He wanted to tell them that he was not what they thought. He wanted to tell them that he was not a man who preferred other men, but his voice was drowned by their accusations. The villagers looked at him with disgust, and they threw him out, forcing him into the evil dark forest that lay beyond the village. Equi entered the forest that had met countless tales of terror. The trees seemed to whisper his name, their branches reaching out like bent fingers in the dim light. For days, he wandered, surviving on wild fruits and stream water, his heart and hate towards his own people growing harder with each passing moment. The pain of his banishment was sharp, but deeper still was the ache of his lost love. He had no family left to return to, no place to call home. As Equi wandered through the forest, he stumbled upon a small hut hidden between the trees. It was old and covered in vines, and the air around it smelled of herbs and strange incense. As he knocked on the door, an old man appeared, his skin dark as night, his eyes sharp and wise. The man was known as Obatala, a native doctor who was rumored to possess great power but was also banished from the village years ago, even though he explained to the king that the gods asked him to remain single. Obatala studied Equi's face with a knowing look. "I have been expecting you. The spirits told me of your coming and the injustice you have suffered," he said, his voice calm. Equi, too tired to speak much, sat down on a nearby log. "I was banished from my village for something I did not do. They think I am like others who have unnatural desires, but I am not. The woman I loved left me for another man, and since then, no woman has cared for me the same way. Now I am alone and abandoned by all." The native doctor listened carefully, then nodded. "I know your pain, young one. The village is blind to the truth. They have punished you for something beyond your control just like they did to me many years ago. You are a victim of their ignorance." Equi looked at Obatala with a mixture of hope and despair. "I want revenge. I want them to feel the pain I have felt. I want them to understand what I went through after Amoka left me. I need the men who banished me to suffer, including the king." Obatala smiled, but it was not a comforting smile. It was the smile of a man who knew the power of darkness. "I can give you what you desire. But know this, revenge is a dangerous path. It can take much more than you expect. Are you prepared for the price it demands?" "I will pay any price," Equi declared. My life has already been taken from me. What more can I lose? I am ready to do anything, Equi replied, his voice cold. I want them to suffer as I have. Obatala nodded again and went to a chest in the corner of the hut. From it, he took out a small, carved wooden figure. It was shaped like a woman, with empty eyes and a twisted smile. This is a voodoo juju called touch and follow, Obatala said. With this, you can make any woman you touch follow you no matter what. She will lose her senses and be compelled to obey your every command. She will follow you, love you, and bear your children. But remember, great power requires great wisdom. How you use this gift will determine your ultimate fate. Equi took the figure in his hand, feeling its coldness, and whispered, I will make them pay. Obatala warned him once more. The power you seek is great, but know that it comes with a cost. The path of revenge will not heal your heart. Equi ignored his warning. I am ready. Under the cover of darkness, Equi began his revenge. He would disguise himself like an old man and enter the village. He started with the wives of the men who had been most cruel during his banishment. One by one, they fell under his charm. A simple touch, a few whispered words, and they would follow him into the depth of the evil forest, their minds clouded by the power of his charms. He created a settlement deep in the forest, where the trees grew so thick and blocked out the sun. The women, under his spell, built homes, cultivated gardens, and lived in a trance-like state of devotion to Equi. As months passed, his community grew. Women disappeared from the village night after night, leaving their husbands' compounds empty and cold. As he entered the village one night, he saw the familiar faces of the women he had once known. He approached one of them and discovered it was the king's favorite wife, Ebo. He spoke the incantation to the voodoo. The moment he touched her, she froze. Her eyes glazed over, and without a word, she followed him into the forest. This final act threw the village into complete disarray. Over the next few days, Equi used the voodoo to take more and more women, each one leaving her home and family without question. The women came willingly, as if they had no choice. Soon, Equi had taken dozens of them, and the village began to panic. The village was thrown into chaos. Men would wake to find their wives gone, with no trace of struggle or sign of where they had gone. The chief called emergency meetings, sacrifices were made to the gods, and diviners were consulted, but none could explain the mysterious disappearances. The king, humiliated and furious, organized a manhunt. Warriors were summoned from neighboring villages, and a large party entered the evil forest, armed with machetes, spears, and powerful charms for protection. They followed the trail of broken branches and footsteps in the sand until they came upon Equi's settlement. What they found froze them on their feet. There, in a large clearing, were all their missing wives. But they were changed. Each woman was heavy with child, their bellies swollen with new life. They moved about the settlement with purpose, their eyes confused but their faces calm. At the center of it all sat Equi, on a throne made from the wood of the sacred Iroko tree. The warriors raised their weapons, but before they could attack, the women formed a human shield around Equi. The men were shocked to see their wives, sisters, and daughters protecting the very man who had stolen them away. Welcome, Equi's voice boomed across the forest. Have you come to see what becomes of a man you cast aside? Look around you. These women now carry my children. They have chosen to follow me, to build a new life away from your cruelty and rigid traditions. The king stepped forward, his voice trembling with rage and fear. What kind of juju is this? Release our wives from your evil spell. Equi laughed, the sound echoing through the forest. Spell? Is it not you who cast the first spell? The spell of false accusations and unjust banishment. I have simply taken what you valued most, just as you took everything from me. You accused me of having unnatural desires and loving men. You banished me for a crime I did not commit, but it was your own customs that were wrong. Now you all must pay for it. The men, seeing their wives' condition and realizing the depth of their predicament, began to panic. They could not fight without harming their wives and unborn children. The king, his pride shattered, fell to his knees with some elders, begging for mercy and the return of their loved ones. "Please release our wives," they cried out. Equi rose from his throne, his presence commanding attention. "There is a price for the return of your wives and the recognition of your children as legitimate members of the village. I demand to be made king. The current king must step down, and all laws regarding the banishment of unmarried men must be abolished." The village elders huddled together, discussing their options in hurried whispers. They knew they were trapped. The women were already carrying Equi's children, and using force would only result in bloodshed and the loss of their unborn offspring. After hours of deliberation, they agreed to Equi's terms. A great ceremony was held to crown Equi as the new king. The women were released from the spell, though many chose to remain with him, having found a different kind of freedom in his forest community. The children, when they were born, were brought to the palace and recognized as royal offspring, creating a new lineage that would forever change the village's future. And so, Equi was unbanished from the village and made king in place of the old ruler. The villagers, though they had no choice, hated him. But Equi was a just and wise leader. He ruled with an iron fist, but he also remembered the pain of his banishment. He worked to make the village prosper, and he cared for the women who had followed him into the forest, ensuring that they and their children were well cared for. Though some he made to follow him by magic, grew to love him in their own way. The babies they bore were brought to the palace, and the village began to change for good. And so it was that a man cast out for being unmarried became the father of hundreds, and a village that prided itself on tradition learned that sometimes the old ways must give way to new understanding. The forest that had once been called evil became known as the Forest of New Beginnings, where Equi's descendants would sometimes go to remember the price of injustice and the power of transformation. Equi ruled for many years, and though his reign was marked by fear and respect, he always remembered the pain that had shaped him. His story became a legend, a warning to all who would judge others without understanding their hearts. The village's tradition of banishing men was eventually abandoned, and the people learned that love, loyalty, and justice were far more important than cruel traditions.